Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go live on Facebook now, just to let everyone know. Okay. So I'll give a minute or so before we start, just to let anyone enter in case they need time to load in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started now then, if everyone's ready. Everyone's good? Okay, awesome. So welcome everyone to Monsoon's webinar today. This is part of our ongoing panel series titled AAPI Identities Through Generations. So today's conversation will highlight the Asian American as a whole identity in Iowa. And it's a very, very diverse term, Asian American itself. In Asia, there's several ethnicities and multiple community groups. So today we want to shed light on how diverse the term Asian American really is. So through that, I just want to go ahead and get started with a quick introduction of myself. So I am Nguyen. I am the Community Outreach and Social Media Manager at Monsoon, and I'm also located in the Des Moines area. Before we get started with our panelists introductions, I want to go over some quick, brief agendas and then technical assistance, and also a little bit about our evaluation. So today it'll be pretty simple, just going over some introductions, and then we'll go into the technical information that I mentioned previously, and then go over the community agreements. Then we'll introduce the panelists and then go into our Q&A for the rest of the session. So with the community agreements, these are what we have listed here, and it's just a general understanding that we're all in this space in solidarity, and also to create a safe space for everyone to share their experience and to be vulnerable. And with that, vulnerability comes with the ability to be empathetic and to be able to respect one another. So keep these agreements in mind, and just the idea of being present and being there for everyone today. Okay. So I have the panelists listed here, and before I introduce them, I just want to go over those technical assistance that everyone will need to know before we go in. There you go. So today we do not have our captioner or ASL interpreters that we've had previously, but there is an option to automatically turn on captioning. Oh, she is here?
Yeah, she's here.
Awesome. Okay. So now that our captioner is here, I'm gonna add them as our live captioning, and then after she's been assigned the captioning, you'll all be able to have that captioning available for you. And if that captioning isn't available, you'll be able to go onto the bottom of your screen, and there should be a CC button, which is going to be the captioning, and then just clicking on that will be able to turn on that captioning for you there. So if you aren't able to find that or have trouble, you can go ahead and just type in the chat and notify me, and then I'll try and get that fixed as quickly as I can. Okay, so I think captioning has been assigned now. So again, if anyone has any trouble finding those captions, please feel free to privately message or just message in the chat, and I'll try my best to get that resolved as quickly as possible. Okay, then with the evaluation, we have that automatically sent after the session. So I won't send it now, but I will send it right before the session ends here, before we all leave. And if you end up missing that link or anything, that's totally fine, because again, a follow-up email will be sent to everyone. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, I'd like to welcome our panelists. I want to thank you all for being here and being part of this conversation. I think it's great that we can have such a diverse panel to really share the experiences for everyone in the Asian American identity. So if you all want to go ahead and whoever wants to go first to introduce yourselves, I like to get to know you all a little bit more, and if you could share a little bit about your cultural heritage as well, that'd be awesome. And then I think I also have some prompts here that you can follow if you'd like. You don't have to answer all of them, just to give you a brief idea of what you'd like to say.
I'll go first.
Okay, yeah.
My name is Pearrey Thim. I identify as Canadian American. Pronouns are she, them. I have been living in Iowa for 12 years. I think I first lived in Boone and then moved to Ames, where I currently live right now. I am the assistant programmer at Monsoon. I'm also involved in Delta Phi Lambda, Sorority Incorporated at Iowa State.
Thank you, Pearrey. I'm going to call on you, Angelina, if you would like to share about yourself.
My name is Angelina, and I'm Vietnamese. I was born in Vietnam, and I came here when I was 6. So I think I've lived in Iowa since 2012. So the math is 10 years. Yeah, 10 years. I currently live in Windsor Heights, and I am the youth intern under 𝐀𝐒, the community health outreach worker.
I can go next.
Okay.
So my name's Kate. I'm Korean American. I've been in Iowa for most of my life. I grew up in Des Moines, like around the suburbs around there. I was adopted like 23 years ago, but I came to America when I was a baby. Let's see. Well, I started volunteering with Monsoon after I graduated high school, and then I campus, and then to college. I ended up working for a direct services nonprofit in Ames, and then I came back now as the youth program coordinator. So I get to oversee the youth violence prevention program, which is really cool. I get to help guide them, answer any questions, support them. But yeah, Shreya and Angelina, I work with them a lot, so it's really cool.
And I suppose I'll finish up. So I am Shreya Joshi. I'm Indian American. I was born here. So I guess I've been in Iowa for 17 years. And I'm a youth intern under the Monsoon's Youth Violence Prevention Program.
All right, awesome. Thank you all for the introductions. So I'll go into our first question here to start us off, and that is just this kind of tying into the title of this webinar of Asian American, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are on what it means to be both Asian and American. And feel free to take time to think up your answers, and you don't all have to say your answers, because I know some questions might relate to others more than they would to some other panelists, or you might all want to say something, and that's totally fine too. But don't feel pressure to always have an answer for each question. I just want to let you guys know that.
I guess I can go first. I feel like for me, I was just talking to some of the youth interns about this yesterday, but for me, it's been really different as an experience because I wasn't surrounded by my culture growing up. I had to kind of seek it out as I got older. And it wasn't without like my parents trying or anything. But for me, finding my identity meant like I didn't really belong with Asian people. I didn't really belong with Americans. I didn't get to do the whole, I'm American in school and then Asian at home. So I didn't really connect to many people besides other Asian adoptees. So I think a lot of my identity revolved around that, not really by choice, but by kind of isolation. But on the flip side, I've gotten to really explore my culture, other cultures, and really make up like what I want for my own identity as I've gotten older, rather than like allowing other people to tell me like who I am, and what I should be.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's something I've seen a lot when talking to other Asian American peers, is that they grow up kind of feeling disconnected from both terms. They don't really feel connected to either being Asian or American. So it's a very personal thing in how we see the term Asian American. So thank you for sharing that.
I can relate to Kate in a bit where I felt kind of disconnected from my culture also because when I moved to Iowa, there's not a lot of Cambodian Americans in this area. So it's just me and my mom, and we kept traditions as much as we could, eating food at home and all these things, but it was kind of being disconnected. I'm sorry if it's loud. Is it loud? My AC is okay.
No, you're good.
Okay. But I would have to go back to Minnesota to visit my dad's side of the family to like do anything culturally related because nobody celebrates Cambodian New Year here. Nobody eats Cambodian food, and you can't go to a restaurant anywhere just to get Cambodian food. But growing up in a predominantly white state too, like I look racially ambiguous. So people, when I tell them like, oh, I'm Asian, they're like, okay, but I don't fit their stereotype of what an Asian person looks like. So I never really, it's not that I never felt Asian, I always felt Asian, but I never felt American, I guess, like other than just being born here because I always was seen as other than, especially since I don't fit into like the archetype of what they thought Asian was. So.
Thank you for sharing, Pearrey. I'll go into the next question then. If Shreya and Angelina, guys, do you guys want to have anything to say, or would you like me to move on?
Okay. I think both Kate and Pearrey covered it pretty well.
Okay, perfect, gotcha. So the next question kind of ties into the first one, which was kind of exploring more about your experience growing up Asian American and how you navigated issues with assimilating as a child, and how did that come into you appreciating your own culture? Because I know a lot of times for Asian American kids, there's a sense of shame, I think, surrounded around the Asian identity, because like Pearrey was saying, and Kate saying, how they feel other, they feel different from everyone around them, especially so if you don't have people that look like you, representation. And so with all that tied in, it comes into this idea of being ashamed of your culture, ashamed of being different, because being Asian is not something you can hide. You go in every day knowing that you look different, knowing that you come from a different background. So I think it'd be really interesting to hear your background and your experiences as well.
So I can start this one. So I was the only Indian girl in my entire grade from K through 6th. So that was like 7 years of me having no reference for being like Asian American other than me. And I think you pointed out well, it's like, it's not something you can hide, right? Like I look very Indian and there's nothing I can do about that. So it was very like, before I got to middle school and high school, I didn't even know, like you don't know what you don't miss what you don't know, right? So it was very different for me to find a community in high school or just like see people who look like me. But I was never ashamed of my culture. And I don't know if it's because I went back to India every year to see my family or what, but I definitely still felt like different, right? If you're the only person who looks like you, then it's a different experience, I think.
Yes.
I guess I can go next with this question. I think for me, there was such a big language barrier, just like even within my own family, because English wasn't my first language, and I like didn't speak English until like late elementary. So it was really hard, like just kind of being on the same page as everyone. And I was always like put into this group with like the other like non-speaking English kids. And then I think within like the schools that I went to, it was so like obvious about like which group you belonged into. So it was just always like me with the other like non-English speaking kids against like everyone else. And then even like within my own family, it was just really hard like trying to like communicate with them, especially with like the different cultural aspects. And I guess I did have like a phase where I just really like didn't appreciate like my culture and where like I came from, because I was constantly like surrounded by people who would like title you for like being so different. And I did really grow up being bullied as a kid for like speaking the way I spoke and the way I looked and like the differences. So I think that was like really hard to like trying to like connect to your culture when like throughout the day you're constantly surrounded by people who don't like you and don't like your culture. And I think it's really sad to say this, but I came to appreciate my own culture because it started becoming trendy. When like people all of a sudden started like, oh, like it's cool that you do this and that, I don't know, like you use chopsticks or something. So I think it was like around that time where it was like so like trendy to like look this certain type of Asian that I started to like appreciate my culture. And I think I'm really like in the process of like accepting my culture because I like it, not because other people like me for who I am, because I'm a people pleaser and I want people to validate me. So I think it's just like coming into like that sense.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing, Angelina. I think you bring up a really good point about how it's often hard to appreciate and really come to love your culture when you constantly are having people that are so against what you stand for and what you identify as. And so having people that are against your authentic self showing up every day when you're in school, it really adds to that kind of sense of shame. And then also wanting to further yourself away from kind of any sort of cultural aspects or Asian aspects, I would say. So thank you for sharing that. And I definitely can relate in ways to your stories about how, just like you said, it's hard to connect with your culture. And I'm glad now that even with, unfortunately, the idea of like Asianness being trendy, I'm glad that now you can come to a point where you can appreciate it, like you said, for you and not for everyone else. And I think that's a super powerful thing. So thank you for sharing.
I think also related to Angelina and Shreya, like I was a very naive child, so like I knew like I was brown and kids were white and black, but like I never saw like any difference in it. Like I was just kind of like, oh, you live differently at home, right? And like so I didn't really understand why it was different at school. So like when I would talk about being Cambodian, it's just like, yeah, I'm Cambodian. People are like, what's that? I would just be like, oh, like my family's from here. So I would basically just be that kid, just like matter of factly just saying things. And then it was when I started growing up that I was like, oh, like people are treating me like, and it was like I think a lot of Asian kids can relate to like lunchbox shame. It's like bringing food home, like bringing food to school from home that like people aren't used to smelling or seeing, and they're like, what is that? Like it's weird, you know? And so that was one of the biggest things that I had growing up was like lunchbox shape. My mom would always pack lunch for me. And then I just started eating school lunch because, but then as I got older, like as Angelina said, it did start getting trendy, you know. Like, as sad as it was when South Asian hate came along and people were like um, supporting the movement, it was like, oh, like people actually care. You know? That's when I started being like really appreciative of it, and also like it was nice to see like all different types of Asians banding together because I feel like within our own race we're kind of separated already because just by region and how Asians are also culturally different. It's really cool to like, see the similarities between everything too, and how like even though all of our cultures are so different, we can band together on like the lunchbox shame, like about food and like how traditions of like New Year's and all these things.
Thank you, Pearrey, for sharing. And I think exactly like what you said, it's really interesting to see the parallels that we all share, even though we are from such a diverse background, because Asia as a whole has so many different cultures, and just people might think if they didn't know better, like Japanese culture and Korean culture could be really similar because they're closer together, but in reality, they're so different, and even more so for Eastern Asian countries to Southeast countries, and then even to South Asian countries as well. So I think through events like this too, we can really start to see those similarities and really be able to build that solidarity together. Okay, my next question I have for you all is what are some important moments in your life that have helped you better understand your background or who you are as a person again?
My favorite thing growing up as a kid was Cambodian New Year. Like it's so big, and it's around the time where Laos New Year and Thai New Year's too. So it's in April, and it's like starting to become spring. So it's just like a very beautiful thing, and it's over the span of 3 days. So I feel like over those 3 days, you really get to see the different aspects of it. And the first day is like just blessings of from monks, and then the second day is the festivities of like dancing and all the food, and the last day is the party. And like that was my favorite thing growing up. Like families always like, when are we gonna get together for New Year? What are we gonna do for New Year? And like we're always getting up in our sarongs and all these things and our traditional clothing, and that was always my favorite part.
Thank you, Pearrey. I think how you pointed out the celebrations and New Year's, those types of celebrations I think are so important. And I remember from the last webinar we had with the Lao community, the panelists talked about how it's so important to have celebration and culture because that's really a powerful thing, and it's very empowering as well to be in community and to have others around you loving you for who you are, loving you for your culture, celebrating with you. And with that, that really helps many people, and especially the younger generation, come to terms with their identity and come to terms with being able to really connect with themselves and their identity once again. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share? If not, I can also move on. Okay, so the next question is a little similar to the last one, but asking a little bit more specifically and wanting to talk more about joy, because I know oftentimes in conversations like this, it is very heavy. So I want to bring a little bit of light in this conversation here. So I want to ask you all how your heritage has shaped the person you are today, and also what brings you joy about your culture, and how have you learned to celebrate and really come to love that aspect of your identity?
I feel like for me, I really love food. I know Mira talks about this a lot, but the way that I show love is by cooking. And for me, I think I struggled a lot with the fact that I didn't get to grow up with people who, you know, taught me how to make food that's connected to Korea essentially. But I did have parents who loved to cook. And my mom always taught me like you measure with your heart. There was never like exact recipes to go off of. And even though it wasn't Korean food, my mom still filled our house, even my dad, with food that our family like is known to make, and it's the way that they've always made it. And so for me, that means that when I started cooking as a teenager and as an adult in my own home, I get to make the food whatever it is. And I think I struggled with the fact that I didn't grow up with Korean parents to help me make these traditional foods, but at the end of the day, I'm still someone who's Korean, and food is meant to be adapted to the family. No family really makes food the same way. So for me, I think it's cool now that I get to share with people in my life, like friends, how to make dumplings homemade. So making the dough or the wrapper, and then adding the things that I love within dumplings, or getting to try new foods with all my friends in different cities, and then getting to adapt those recipes to be my own. And I think that's the exciting thing about what I hope to pass down is my love for food, but also like you can really make your culture what it is and really embrace it in those ways. But yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty distant from like Korean heritage, but I think food helps me feel connected as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely I very much relate to the idea of food and connection, because no matter what, throughout multiple cultures, food has always been this connecting link, and it's kind of an unspoken love language almost of food in the Asian community. So I think it's a really beautiful and amazing thing that you now get to learn about your identity on your own terms and be able to bring culture into your life on your own terms as well, that you can pass down to your friends and family.
I think mine's also a different story because okay, so my parents got divorced when I was really young. So my dad's side of the family lives in Minnesota, and me and my mom live in Iowa. But since me and my mom were kind of isolated from the rest of my family, I think it's just a familial thing. But my mom's side of the family kind of celebrates things differently than my dad's side of the family. And so like how my heritage has shaped me is that like majority of the Cambodian people that I've been around have just been family. Like it's everybody's family, and I don't know anybody else that's not Cambodian and not family. So or it's just like a big culture of like, even if we're not related, we are family because we have to call and give everybody a title for something. So everybody's your auntie, everybody's your uncle, everybody's your grandma, your grandpa. And so I feel like that togetherness of always calling, like giving a title to somebody, you just have that shared bond together. So like the thing that brings me joy about it is that like in Minnesota, I feel like the community that my family has built there overall is that like there's the generation that moved to Cambodia, right, from, or moved to Minnesota from Cambodia. So they built that foundation of what they wanted the rest of us to live our lives and be able to have like careers and things here. So definitely when it comes to food and all these things, the new school generation of like my dad and me trying to navigate the United States is that like we still are able to share our traditions, but we all do it in different ways because a lot of my cousins who are my age, we don't speak Cambodian because our family didn't want us to, and because they thought we wouldn't be able to learn English. But we're still like celebrating like Cambodian New Year, and we're still celebrating like when it comes to like funerals and people passing. We have this thing of like we always cremate, and we have a 10-day and 100-day celebration after they've passed so that they can move on into their next life or the afterlife. It's just it's just cool to see like the different generations celebrating things differently, but also the same. So that's the thing that brings me joy, is that like even though we're different generations, we're still able to express our culture.
Thank you for sharing, Pearrey. Would anyone like to share anything else before I move on? Now I'll go into the next slide, which is a quote here. I'll read it in case you're unable to read it as well, because I know that font is a little tricky with the background. So the quote reads, "This concept of a forever foreigner feels very real. I will never be called an American, even though my passport says that. I'm always labeled South Asian or Asian American. And when I visit India, I'm always told that I'm a foreigner or American. So you feel stuck that you don't have a real identity anywhere." And this is from 𝐀𝐒𝐈𝐀𝐍, a first-generation American born in Wyoming, whose family is from India. So with this quote in mind, I'll kind of let you sit with that and kind of take that in as I read the next question here, which is, what does reclamation look like for those who grew up feeling disconnected from their own ethnic identity?
So this kind of brings me back to the first question of what does being Asian, what is being Asian American? And my first thought was it feels like not really being Asian or American because you don't feel like you belong in either. The idea that you can never be just American, you always have a prefix, right? I think is true for like many marginalized communities, right? You're African American, you're Asian American, or you're like there's always something, because if you're not white, you can never just be American, right? They even have a prefix for like Native Americans, and like they're like the indigenous groups here. So I think reclamation is a very interesting concept, because I think you first have to ask like what you're reclaiming, right? My favorite thing I think about being, if I had to pick about being like a first or second generation, right? Like your parents are immigrants, but you were born here, is that I get to pick what parts of my culture I want to keep, right? So if there are things about my culture that I don't want to keep, then I don't have to keep it. And it's the same for like American culture. Like if there are values or statuses that like I don't like about American culture, then I don't have to keep it. So I think reclamation is about trying to like keep the parts of your identity you want to and the values you want to.
Thank you, Shreya. And I think you bring a really important point, which is this idea that there's always, it's never just American unless you're white. And for us and other groups that aren't white, we always have to have that hyphenated word before American. We can never just be that. We are always put with a label before us. So I think that's a really good point you brought up, and something I didn't even think about, especially with the idea of Native Americans and like, what is that really even like? Why is that a term that is so widely used, you know, for the indigenous groups here in the States? So thank you for that, Shreya.
Yeah, thank you, Shreya. I really agree with what you said about picking out stuff from like your culture, or like what you like about like Americans to pick, because I know like there are certain times where like I love my culture's foods and our like traditional outfits, or the games we have, but then there are different like aspects that we have, such as colorism, or like even like racism and stuff that I know like I wouldn't want to bring into like, my own life. So I really connect with what you said. For me, growing up, having a name was such like a big thing, like my ethnic name, because I wasn't born with the name Angelina, and just always having like people like mispronounce it, or not trying to like say your name right, or like just trying to give you nicknames because your name is so hard to say. Just stuff like that was always such like a big thing for me that made me really feel disconnected from my own like identity. And it was also because like in Vietnam, it's common for all your siblings to have the same name, and then they will differentiate you between your middle name or a nickname that's given to you. And so when we came to the States, like it was really hard to do paperwork. And that's why we had to like pick out an English name because my parents thought that would just be easier. And for me, I was so grateful for that like English name growing up because I dread attendance time when people are saying your name. Like I remember just sitting in class every time attendance was being called, whether we had a sub or something, like my heart sunk because that time my English name wasn't like legalized. And so they still had like my Vietnamese name on there. And I remember like people would ask me, oh, Angelina, like, what is that name? And I like, they start like making fun of me for that. So it was just growing up trying to like tell people that Angelina like isn't my given name, and I do have like an ethnic name that now I am really proud of and that I want to like embrace. Tell people like if I meet new people, sometimes I'll tell them like my Vietnamese name because it's something that I feel like was just like taken away from me for so long, and I just want to be able to like be proud of like this name that was given.
Thank you, Angelina.
So I definitely relate to that. I think another point of reclamation though is so like for me that experience of attendance or like a substitute is now a source of great amusement for me. Like I'm always like excited, like what are they gonna come up with this time? And not in like a mean way, just it's amusing to me. Or like when I go to Starbucks or Panera or like some restaurant where they have to take your name and then they'll ask me for spelling, like I'm like, oh, this is gonna be good. Like I went to Starbucks yesterday and my name was spelled ASHRAY.
Oh, wow.
Or like
That's
I
definitely a
think
new one.
Panera spelled my name Sherpa, Sherbia. Like it's amusing to me because like I think reclamation is like, you know, feeling confident enough in yourself or like feeling secure that like, you can like laugh about these things. Because if you take a minute to look at them, like they're kind of funny, right? But it's only if you feel like secure enough in your identity, and I think that's a process of like reclamation.
Yeah, I definitely like forgot about that until Angelina brought that up. My given name is Pearrey, so before my name it's SOK, and like culturally for Cambodians, it's our names obviously given to us by our parents, but like S's for girls is like very like traditional. Like my mom's name is Saran, and like Pearrey is a normal name that people hear, but the way it's spelled, everybody always is like trying to be fancy with it, like Pearrey or something like that. And I'm like, nope, it's just Pearrey. But also my last name is Thim. It sounds very normal, but it looks really weird. So I was always like I grew up with all the same people in high school and everything. So they all knew when it came to attendance when the teacher would look at it and they're just like, I don't know what this is. Everybody's just like it's Pearrey. Like I wouldn't even have to do it myself because I just know. But relating back to the question, um, this might just be like a me, Anne, and Kate thing, but we're sorority sisters of Delta Phi Lambda at Iowa State. And a big part of reclaiming my culture was the sorority for me because, like I said, growing up, I was around other Asian people, but they couldn't really relate to me in a sense that they were all East Asian people. And they all kind of like fit the mold of like going into STEM and wanting to be doctors, lawyers, and all those things. And I just didn't want that for myself. Or like I tried to do that for myself, but I just knew once I got to college, it's just not what I wanted to do. And a big support for me, if it wasn't from our sorority, I just wouldn't be in the place that I am right now. Like I wouldn't be at Monsoon. because it's just more Asian women support, right? And so like always feeling like even other than in the Asian community, because there's just not a lot of Southeast representation in Iowa along with other Asian representation. So joining a sorority was a big thing for me because it was like all of us of different cultures were coming in, still having the basis of food and like all these other things.
Thank you all for sharing. I think you all brought up some really interesting thoughts. And I think, Shreya, you brought up how reclaiming is kind of finding this confidence in your identity, and kind of like what Angelina was saying about being scared, like the whole roll call, name call. Like I can definitely relate to that because Anne is not my legal name or my birth name at all. It's actually Daman, which is very different from Anne, but my parents decided to give me an English nickname so that when I went to school, people wouldn't keep butchering my name, because I always knew very interesting name was about to, and so younger, like I mortified at roll call because I knew the moment the teacher was pausing, I knew my name was about to come up, because you can see the wheels turning in their head of like, okay, I don't know how to pronounce this. And then I have to get ready for everyone in the classroom to kind of make those like snickers and like little remarks that kind of remind you or make you feel, at least in that moment when I was younger, a sense of just outcast, of being very much other than. And so Shreya, I think it's really an empowering thing that you bring up, how you learn to be confident. And I think a lot of reclaiming of our Asian culture and Asian heritage is choosing to have pride in it and choosing to be brave and take effort in being and identifying in our Asian culture. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, I want to ask, since you can bring in a new perspective of being a adoptee, and you don't have to answer, I'm curious to know. I know oftentimes when I speak to my adoptee friends, they bring up this idea of simultaneously being able to find joy and honor and pride in your Asian heritage and culture, but also feeling kind of a sense of loss or grief over something that you can't really regain as an adoptee. So I'm wondering like what your thoughts are on that, or if you relate to that, or kind of what you're thinking.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna I was just thinking about this. So like when in the conversation of names, so my name is like 𝐀𝐒𝐈𝐀𝐍, but obviously, well, not obviously to a lot of people, but in Korea, your family name is a given, so it comes first. So Kim, and then your like given name, so it'd be like 𝐻𝐼𝐀. So it'd be like 𝐀𝐒𝐈𝐀𝐍 is how you'd write it, when in reality, like in America, it'd be like 𝐻𝐼𝐀 Kim. The only thing is that the reason my parents chose not to keep that, so like on my Korean birth certificate, that's what it would say, and those documents. But I think most of the time, at least within the agency that they adopted through, our names are given by like social workers, the agency. It's not something that is really thought out, which I feel like there's a lot of connections within the names that people are given. And so my parents decided like, okay, like let's give her, a name that we feel connected to. And so my first and middle name, so it's like Caitlin Gail Bailey. Bailey is my dad's name. Gail is my mom's middle name. And my brother, same story. He was born with a Korean name, but same thing, it was given to him by an agency rather than a family. So my parents chose to name Keith, which is my dad's middle name. So I have connections to my family in a different way than other people. So I still feel a little bit connected in that way, but I do find myself feeling lucky that I grew up with an American name because of the isolation that a lot of Asian kids had within my school district, because I was the only Korean student up until I think high school. So it's a very isolating thing. But when it comes to like reclamation, I didn't think I really had the ability to do it until I became an adult. And I was just talking to someone about this yesterday, that I think that while it's always, never a malicious thing, people usually refer to adoptees within the Asian community when like they want them to be a part of the conversation. But then when we share our own experiences as Asian Americans, we're immediately isolated as like, yeah, but you wouldn't understand because you didn't grow up with Asian parents. Or, it's like, and they don't mean it, I've heard it, commonly. It usually happens very frequently. And I know people don't mean it in a negative way, but it definitely comes off that way. And so they usually like refer to us, outside of like this conversation, right? People usually refer to us when they want to know our input as Asian American adoptees. But as soon as we try and discuss our own experiences as Asian Americans, it's immediately like, oh, well, it's not the same. And so I definitely feel that, but of course, like there's beauty in the reclamation. So I don't really feel connected to Korean culture, but I also don't have this like, I think I already mourned the loss of that, right? So I think connecting with food is like what I said. So that, or within our sorority and the MGC, like Multicultural Greek Association, we have a lot of times where we're all cooking together, almost like this family. And it's a lot of different Asian cultures. It's not just East Asian, it's not just one culture. And so I think those moments within food is really beautiful to me. I really love that. And it's not just my culture that I get to share with other people. We get to kind of collectively experience it. And I've always, those are some of my favorite moments from being in the sorority, was all of us together, cooking, sharing food, family style, those kinds of conversations we would have, and we'd be able to connect, and it didn't really matter your background. It was mostly just like, our experiences together. Yeah. So that's how I feel about it.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you for that insight as well, because hearing that, I definitely can see how this idea that I think most Asian Americans can feel of not feeling Asian or American enough, definitely more so for Asian adoptees, because it's like not only are you getting ostracized from or feeling different from like Asians that are from Asia versus Asian Americans that are born in America as like first generation, like there's that disconnect there. But more so when the Asian Americans that have been born and raised in America now feel use language and verbiage that kind of isolates adoptees into like oh, well, you're not Asian enough sort of feeling. Because I know definitely my adoptee friends have made that statement as well, as like, not only do we feel disconnected from like the motherland, but we also feel disconnected just from the community as a whole here as well. So that's a really good insight from you. And I'm glad that now you bring up this idea of like choosing and like kind of utilizing food to get in touch with your culture, even though you feel disconnected from it, because in a sense, we're more than just the label. We are our own identity and we are our own person. And so we bring in our own cultures and we bring in our own perspectives. And I think it's a really beautiful thing the way you've done it, in how you are Kate, you're more than a Korean adoptee, you're more than Korean American, you're more than Asian American. And I think that's an amazing thing to see. So thank you. Okay. So moving forward, how do you feel schools can better support Asian American students? I know, especially for me, I think Kate, you and Pearrey have said that it was hard to kind of connect in high school or when you were younger. And I think that's definitely something I resonate with. And it was a lot because I never learned about Asian American history. Like a lot of things I learned, like Vincent Chin, I didn't know about any of that until I went to college and I joined the Asian sorority and learned about Asian history through there. And I really felt like that was kind of a part of me reclaiming my identity, is being able to understand the history and being able to understand how my people got here and how the Asian American community as a whole came to migrate to the US, and the history and all that comes with that as well. So I'd like to hear your perspectives, and especially for you, Shreya and Angelina, who are in the younger generation, how you're very much more connected to the high school experience and younger than that. So I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on how schools can help support Asian American students.
So I think there's a quote at the Monsoon office that says, "No history, no self." And I think that's actually in Kate's office right now, but it's on the board. Anyway, so I think the idea of identity being created through like history is very important for Asian Americans, because I think for other communities there's a sense that like we've been here, but for Asian Americans it's like you came in the 1980s, like, you know, like get over it. But that's just like not true. Right? Asian Americans have been here for generations. Like there's documentation of like an East Indian person in Jamestown. And so I think it's really important to like integrate Asian American history into the curriculums. And not to plug, but Monsoon actually spent like months trying to develop a curriculum for Asian American history, and we got it into schools. And like the response from Asian American students was like, that explains a lot, or they were excited to see their history being displayed because nobody ever talks about it otherwise. So I think that's something schools can do, is focus more on Asian American history. And just, I think the other things teachers have a tendency to do is like Asians are kind of white for them, or Asians are like the smart kids for them. And like that's a very weird dynamic to be in when you're considered white by like for like 6 hours a day and then not considered white for like the rest of the day. Like I think that's a broader societal issue, I think, less than a school issue.
Thank you, Shreya.
Going off of like the history classes, I know at Roosevelt we have an Asian American history class, but the curriculum only covers East and Southeast Asia, and they leave out this whole chunk of Asia as well. And I think that itself is a problem. Another problem is just the way that teachers are represented in classrooms. I know with like DMPS, a lot of teachers are getting laid off or are quitting just with like current like legislations and stuff like that. And most of the teachers are teachers who are teachers of color, or queer teachers, or teachers who actually try to talk about like real issues. And by like real issues, I mean like actually address like the systemic like racism, you know, stuff like that, where it creates like deeper conversations within classrooms. And I think that itself is like a problem, because you're taking away like representations for students, especially like in an urban school area where you have such like a diverse population. So I think really it all starts with like representation and making sure that the curriculum is diverse.
Thank you, Angelina.
I just, I'm sure I was talking about teachers will Asian American, actually it's like East Asian students in particular, because Pearrey did bring up like being ethnically ambiguous, right, in a mostly white state or school, but being treated like you're white, and then when you're with your peers, you're not white. I've even heard a peer of mine who is from Pakistan, and she had said like, yeah, but the model minority myth, like that's a positive stereotype. So like, is it really that bad, right? Because she's faced a lot of discrimination, which I completely validate. But when we have that narrative that exists, it's dangerous, because I struggled a lot in school, but then in high school, I got to make my own decisions and advocate for myself as far as which classes I wanted to take. And I ended up getting really good results. But up until, 10th to 12th grade, like right before then, they would see test scores and immediately just think, oh, like this is so surprising. Or I even had like a math teacher in 9th grade being surprised that I was in like the lower math class. And although it's like a very small thing that most people don't realize, it's like we fly under the radar a lot of the times. Mental health in particular, obviously, like we've had those conversations where we fly under the radar because not only is it a taboo subject in general, but when you think of an Asian American, like we think of successful business people, doctors, nurses, lawyers, people who are hardworking, are really motivated, do amazing at school. And it's like they forget that we struggle just as much as anyone else. And I mean, there's already the talk of like how women in general, they are diagnosed much later in life with certain learning disabilities. And a lot of times they have to advocate for themselves. Women of color in general have to advocate a lot for their own medical issues. And so I think that when it comes to schools, they need to realize that we are more than just Asian American and the stereotypes that have long been a thing for generations, because they're going to continue to fail students in that way. And students will continue to feel like no one's really paying attention to me. So maybe I just need to continue, living through this stereotype because that's where I belong. That's how I can identify myself.
Thank you, Kate. You all bring up a really good point. And I like, Angelina, how you said that we should see representation in teachers, because honestly, now that I think about it, I didn't have an Asian teacher until I went to college. And so that definitely, when someone that is teaching you, someone in a place of education that is able to represent you or in some way, or able to relate to you as well in another way. So, and with that being said too, I think a lot of power comes with knowledge of, and with Asian American history courses, and making sure that it's diverse as well, because Angelina, like you said, with these courses, they tend to focus a lot on East or Southeast Asian history, while completely negating the rest of Asia that has a huge place in US history as well. And so with that, I think when we hear the model minority myth, oftentimes it has been used to pit Asians against Asians, as well as Asians and other marginalized groups. And through education, my hope, and I think the hope for many people, is that people will see the struggles in the Asian community, see how diverse truly the term Asian is, because it encompasses so much. And just that term is so limiting alone. And to be able to really have people understand the nuances and also the beauty and also the tragedy that comes within the community, I think it would be super empowering and would help to kind of dismantle this myth, that the model minority myth, or this idea of seeing that we don't struggle as much as other groups because we're high achieving, when in turn that actually becomes really hurtful, like how you said, Kate, where when it comes to mental health, like Asian Americans are less likely to be seeking mental health in the first place, let alone to be diagnosed and get proper treatment. And so it ends up being a lot of self-advocating. And with education, now we have more than just ourselves advocating. We now have a system advocating for us. We now have teachers advocating for us. So I think that education is really important. Thank you all for sharing.
I have a couple more things to say on that last question. Sorry.
Please share. No.
Also, with like the curriculum, like when I like look through it, what I notice is that whoever is making the curriculum likes to nitpick what part of history that they would like to talk about, and like erasing like the darker aspects of history, or like history where it talks about like history where it's clearly like part of systemic racism or like colonization that are in it. And so like to nitpick, oh, we want to talk about this and this, but we're going to totally erase this part of history where like white people have been like is the cause of it. And I find that to be like really frustrating in a way, because I think like all Asian countries have been colonized by a European settler. So to kind of like nitpick what you want to pick and erase like just such a deep part history is just kind of like whitewashing our own history, and then like having to sit through class and listen to it is like not even able, it's like being in a space where your voice is supposed to be heard, but it's not a space where your voice is welcomed. So I think that is such a big part of it. And it's also schools, I know within like DMPS, there is a huge language barrier like between parents and like the teachers. Because I know like when important information is being put out, it's kind of like me having to do my best translating using Google Translate to try to translate for my parents. Or just like sometimes going to like school meetings when it's obviously targeted towards white students, and you're kind of just sitting there like with your parents, like not knowing what's happening, not understanding like I can't do this at home, or I can't do that at home, you know. Another thing is teachers, especially when you're in a classroom where there's only, I know in my English class, it's me and this other Asian girl, and they would get us mixed up every single day. And we don't look nothing alike. We're like, our face shapes are different. And it's not just with like Asians too, it's like other people of color. There are 2 Black hijabis in my class as well. And my teacher loves to get them mixed up, and they look nothing alike. I think it's just like those little things like within schools that you can't help but notice.
Thank you, Angelina.
I also just have a little anecdote going with, since I haven't been in high school for a very long time, so I don't know how things have changed, but going about like kind of nitpicking and choosing like which history to teach. The only time I ever took a history class and I was like actually in it was when I took an AP Gov class, and it was because my teacher was very unbiased, and she was more gearing the class to whatever you fit on the spectrum politically. Like you'll have your own thoughts and processes in order to like advocate for yourself. But a different history class I took, I just remember we had an assignment where we had to interview somebody from something historical that happened in the United States history. It was like World War II, 9/11, and like my family only moved to the States like 30 years ago. And even though my family lived during 9/11, it's not like they were there. It's just like it's not that dismissing the experiences, but I was asking my teacher if like, can I interview my grandma because she lived in Cambodia during Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War kind of also affected Cambodia in a sense because if nobody knows, there was a um, genocide of Cambodian people, and it was called the Khmer Rouge, and it kind of happened because of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, because the United States couldn't tell the difference between Cambodian and Vietnamese people, and the language is completely different. We look completely different, but I was asking her if I could do that, and she was like, "I don't think it really pertains to American history," and I was just like, "Okay." So I did my thing and did the assignment the way I was supposed to, and I remember at the end of the assignment, I was like, I feel very dismissed. I was like, you basically said it wasn't American history, but as a person who is American, as a student, like this is American history. And I'm like, for things that you taught me, it is American history. And she just kind of sat there, and I was like, there are other Cambodian students that are going to be coming in after me, and if they want to interview for them, I feel like they're completely allowed to, because in the assignment, she also said like, oh, if you don't know anybody, like I can contact you with a World War II vet or something. I'm like, I don't want to interview somebody I don't know. Like that just feels so insincere, and like asking them questions about an experience that I don't know a lot about and they don't know me. So it's nice to hear that they are trying to build curriculums and things like that. But it is stuff like this that needs to be talked about. It can't be nitpicked that like, oh, we're gonna ignore just the United States involvement in Vietnam and all these things. Even during the time people were supportive of the Vietnam War. So to just dismiss it, it's like dismissing an entire population of Southeast Asians.
Thank you, Pearrey, for sharing that. And I think that kind of leads into a little anecdote I want to share quickly here that relates to you, Pearrey, how of the nitpicking and choosing in history, and how we're often told that Asian history isn't a part of US history, but oftentimes the reason why there are so many migrants, so many refugees, is because of US involvement in these countries. And it has led to a lot of trauma that has transcended upon generations. And I think it does a very big disservice to the youth and to future generations to not discuss this and not talk about it. And specifically, I remember when I was in middle school, we were learning about history, and specifically, it was around the time of Vietnam War that we were kind of discussing, but it was in a very, very wide lens that the war was told. And it pretty much just covered the battles and what happened. It never really went into anything beyond that, talking about historical battles and events. And I remember our assignment was to go out and interview somebody that is a veteran. And of course, during the time, due to the draft, almost everyone in their family has someone that is a veteran. But for me, my grandpa is a veteran, but that is a completely different perspective than it would be for a white veteran, because he was in Vietnam fighting for his country, fighting for his freedom, fighting for his life, his family's life, and the future generations, all their lives. And so to carry that weight, it's hard for him to talk about that. And so I couldn't go to him to talk about for this assignment. And I remember asking my teacher if I could interview my dad, because he was directly affected by the war. He is a refugee because of the war. He lost his home, his country, everything because of this. And I think that's a very important thing to discuss when we're discussing stories of war veterans, because why are we not talking about those that directly are affected the most? And those are the people that have lost their country and have lost that sense of identity within themselves. And so when I asked my teacher, she told me that that isn't part of the assignment. You have to interview a veteran. And so she ended up just giving me a list of people I could contact, and that was it. I didn't have any other say other than that. And so thank you, Pearrey, for bringing that up, because I think it is really important that we move away from this idea of just such a static sense of education, when it could be so well-rounded if we introduce multiple perspectives and a diverse amount of perspectives at that.
Also, still going to this question, sorry, I didn't think we would be on this. For people who are watching, like future, it's not just right now, but this could not just, it doesn't even have to be a whole Asian curriculum. It could just be about also pointing the perspective, because I also remember learning about Ellis Island and Angel Island. And if people who don't know about Angel Island and Ellis Island was like the island a lot of European immigrants went through to come to the United States. And Angel Island was on the West Coast, and there's a majority Eastern Asians, Korean, Japanese. But there's a whole like Chinese Exclusion Act and everything that happened along with a lot of Asian immigrants moving over. So it doesn't even have to be about a whole curriculum of Asians. It's just continuing the perspective of like other races that are happening in American history, because I didn't even know about, I actually learned about the Chinese Exclusion Act in high school, which I feel like a lot of people didn't learn about. So I feel like that's what sparked my wanting to learn about Asian history. But I feel like we're doing better when it comes to Black history in schools and learning about the perspective from a Black point of view instead of a white American point of view. But helping better support Asian Americans. It's just also changing the narrative of going on the Asian side and not just the American side.
Thank you for that, Pearrey. All right, so I have two last questions here before we wrap up. So here, I just want to ask that because of the rise in hate crimes towards Asian Americans and also the Pacific Islander community, what does it look like to you to support the Asian or AAPI community, both internally and externally? So for those in the Asian community and those that are not.
So I think this is an interesting question because it reminds us of like how diverse the Asian community is. Like, for example, after COVID, right, like I was not targeted because I didn't look like, you know, quote unquote, like Chinese, because, you know, I guess every East Asian and Southeast Asian person looks Chinese, right? But at the same time, like people who are East Asian and Southeast Asian may not deal with like Islamophobia in the way that that targets like people who aren't even Muslim but are just brown, right? So I think it's interesting, like when we point out that Asian Americans and Pacific Islander Americans face different systems or face different societal biases, like even within our own community. Like when I go to the airport, like I'm always like randomly stopped, or like somebody in my family always randomly selected. But you know, like during COVID, when I was going out, I didn't have anybody like, you know, telling me that like I was the virus. So I think it's an important thing to point out is that even within our community, we have to support each other because we face different biases and different forms of discrimination.
Thank you, Shreya, for that and for that perspective that with how diverse the Asian community is, we come with different systemic oppression and different ways that we've been oppressed. And so I think for me, especially, it resonates a lot with what you said on how I think there should be an emphasis on internal support, because oftentimes I think we are pitted against each other due to the model minority myth and other aspects as well, that instead of working together, we end up kind of pushing each other away and moving into our own communities. So I think with everything now, especially, there should be a really strong push for that internal connection and internal support. So thank you, Shreya. Would anyone else like to share?
Share. Oh my goodness, I can share. Yeah, it is interesting to think about like the term Asian American, like Shreya said, it's so broad, the different countries, and even within like the same country, the languages are spoken differently. There's different words, the food is made differently, clothing is like it's just so diverse. And so yeah, for me, I had a lot of friends who are Deshi or they're brown. And when Trump was elected president in 2016, they faced a lot of fears. They faced a lot of racism. Their parents faced a lot of microaggressions. It was very scary. But for me, I felt very safe because I really wasn't being targeted. I wasn't being called a terrorist. You know, there wasn't these harmful words being used to describe me. But then, of course, on the flip side, I experienced a lot of microaggressions following COVID, which was a very different experience than some of my friends. I do know that for my parents, at least, because mostly my brother had some friends who were undocumented and he spent a lot of time with them or at his job, my parents were really fearful that with all the things around DACA and ICE that was really amplified probably right before COVID, my mom was really fearful that he didn't have his paperwork, his naturalization paperwork, because he was not naturalized as a citizen coming here. So my mom was very fearful that something would happen to him. And she was really anxious about us having, you know, the right paperwork to prove, you know, we are who we are. But also I felt pretty protected in that right as well, because I have two white parents. So I knew I would be okay in the end of all of that. But when it comes to, I guess, like unity, Asian Americans or people of color in general are really, really family community oriented. Mira always likes to say it's not about the self, it's about the fact that there are consequences of our actions. And you can feel the weight of it within our community. And we feel it very heavily when we disappoint the people around us in our family or circles. And so for me, it's not always about trauma dumping on social media or sharing the horrific, you know, experiences I've had as an Asian American woman. Honestly, it's like getting together with my friends and just being together. Like I remember our sorority, we really didn't talk about the Georgia shooting that happened with the Asian women, whereas like other people probably expected us to talk about it. In reality, like we have lives to live, and these are experiences that we're not really shocked by anymore. Like these are things that we're used to or have faced in the past, or we've heard stories of, you know, racism or microaggressions that although it's like really tragic, those conversations are really difficult to have when you're already, you know, kind of experiencing the daily life of being a marginalized individual. So for me, I feel like support internally and externally is like coming together as a community, celebrating our stories, celebrating our culture in different ways, sharing it with other people, and really focusing on our own like well-being and doing things that serve us, rather than always feeling like we're obligated to share, you know, our experiences, and we're obligated to be the spokesperson of the Asian American community, you know, whatever that means. Yeah, it's kind of a lot, but that's how I feel about all of that, because I feel like the rise in like hate crimes really has just been a thing for so long, but it's just now being noticed because Asian Americans are finally taking up space that they fully deserve. Yeah, I feel like we're all still navigating like what that means to take up space.
Thank you, Kay. I really like what you said about how connection and doing what serves us is the support that we need. And I totally agree. I think there is so much weight on a lot of Asian American shoulders, with especially the rise in hate crimes that have not, this is like, it's not a new thing. And especially so for the South Asian community that faces a lot of Islamophobia. It's been there for a long time. And we don't often see that because we don't often come together. And if we do, it's normally in times like this where it's conversation, very heavy conversations, where it's almost like Kate said, an obligation to share your stories. Although we are here because we want to share our stories, I know a lot of other people do feel that way. And I think being able to kind of switch the narrative and make it a celebration, make it a sense of community and a sense of belonging is what we really, really, truly do need, because we've all as a collective felt outcasted or felt other at some point in our lives. So to be able to be with people that can relate to that, and now that we can create our own sense of belonging, I think is really important to that kind of healing space as well as that connection. Okay, anyone else like to share anything before I move on to our last question? All right, so for the last one, I just want to end on nice terms. There you go. So I just want to ask if you have any advice for young Asian American kids, maybe something you wish someone told you when you were younger, or something you want the future generation to leave with after hearing this.
Yourself. This like be your most authentic self, being Asian and all. Like for me, I wish somebody would have just been like, bring the food to school, wear whatever you want, show it as much as you want, because the people that are gonna make fun of you and the people that are gonna put you down are just the people that shouldn't be around you in general. If you feel like you have to diminish yourself to fit in a space, just don't do that. Don't make yourself feel small at all. Like we talk about empowerment on these things. It's really hard, especially if you're in a really, really small town, but I think it's like finding your people, even if it's not other Asian people, but people accepting that just you for yourself. And I don't know if that necessarily understand to be Asian. There's people who are gonna like you. I think also being Asian, like you can have friends who like anime. Like it's just small things like that that you can talk about. That's kind of like empowering your culture, but it's not having to like bring friends to like Cambodia or something like that.
I don't know, I suddenly feel aged because it's like, do I count as like a young Asian American kid? Like I'm 17. Angelina is like younger than I am. It's like, I guess like what advice would I give myself like right now? I think is even like an answer to this question. Or like what advice would I give my cousins who are like 12 years younger than me in like a small town in Connecticut, right? Like
Yeah.
I think my thing would be that like other people can help you, but at the end of the day, you are the only person who figures out how you feel about things, right? Whether it be your identity or your views on like the world, like only you ultimately determine what that is. And you don't have to listen to people who tell you how to feel or think or be a certain way. whether it be like your family or your friends like trying to make you more less Asian, or your family trying to make you more Asian. Like at the end of the day, like you get to decide like who you are, and nobody else really does have power over that.
Thank you, Shreya. I love that. I love that.
I think advice for like people my age, myself, or maybe middle schoolers, kind of to know your history. Know your history, know the true history. I think like maybe just saying like know your history can kind of be so broad, because history is always altered with depending on who's teaching it. So I guess just like know like the true history and take it in the way that you want to take it. I feel to me, everyone interprets history differently based on your identity and who you are. But just like learn like the history of not just like where you come from, but where other people come from. I know just like sometimes I'll just be like watching like a documentary or something, which I know sounds like lame for my age, but like it happens.
No, I totally
it happens.
feel you. Documentaries are fun to watch.
Sometimes, yeah, it happens. Just of like different groups' history. I think it's really important to not only understand like who you are, but like your community. And my community is not only just like the Vietnamese community. I feel like it's just like this whole community of different ethnicities that can come together. So not sure that's good advice, so like learn your history.
No, that was perfect. Thank you for sharing, Angelina.
I can go next, I guess, or last. But I guess a lot of it is just like, don't feel shame or guilty for whatever you're feeling. I know for me, like I really wanted to be white for so long. And I think then it's like, then you're like, no, positivity always, embrace your culture, da 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 da, like never feel ashamed. But it's okay, like to be, upset or to feel disappointed or, to feel like, ugh, I don't belong. Like it's okay to feel that way. But I feel like don't give it power. At the end of the day, like don't feel shame that you're not super positive or super embraced with your culture, or that you're super connected, or, that you don't speak your mother tongue. It's like all of these things that I think Asian Americans, specifically teenagers, feel a lot of weight, a lot of heavy expectations, not only from family, but also themselves, from society, from school, all of these things that they're hearing that they're supposed to do, supposed to be like, supposed to feel, it's all of these things, when in reality, like I always tell the interns, but like your one priority really should be you. Like you should be at the top of your to-do list, which is taking care of yourself. And so I feel like my advice would be, don't feel shameful for whatever you're feeling, whatever you're going through. Like it's okay to feel what you're feeling, but also remember to take care of yourself, and advocate for yourself if you can. Yeah. And like, yeah, I guess like you can embrace yourself in different ways. You don't have to follow, the same path that everyone else is. Like your identity, like you said, is uniquely yours, and you get to make it whatever you want. You don't have to let other people don't get to decide what that is for you, basically.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for ending us off on that note. Okay, so that is all the questions I have for you all today. Thank you so much again for being here. I really appreciate you all just wanting to be a part of this conversation, because it was really insightful for me, and I really hope that everyone watching or that will be watching in the future takes a lot out of this conversation and is able to reflect and really take action after this is over. So with that being said, I hope you all the best. I wish you a good rest of your day. Before we leave, I also want to thank our captioner for providing us the live captioning for today's event. And of course, again, a big thank you to our panelists, Kate, Angelina, Shreya, and Pearrey, for being here today. Before we leave, again, I want to send that evaluation link I mentioned previously. So I'll send that in the chat. But again, if you're unable to save it or forget about it, there's going to be an email that will be followed up after this webinar is over. Okay, so with that being said, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and that is going to be the end of our conversation today. So thank you all to those that are here joining us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.